Today, we're going to dive into a topic that is just so important, understanding the warning signs of suicide. Now, the goal here isn't to make anyone a doctor overnight, but it is to empower all of us with what the research shows so we can be a little better at recognizing when someone we care about might need some help.
So let's start with a question that really gets to the heart of it all. Is this a myth or a fact? Most suicides happen suddenly, completely out of the blue, with no warning signs at all. Just think about that for a second, because how you answer that question changes everything about how we can approach this.
Well, it turns out that idea is a total myth. The research is overwhelmingly clear on this. In the vast majority of cases, there are warning signs. Now, they might be quiet, they might be confusing, but they're there. The key then is learning what to look for so we can actually see them.
Okay, so if the signs are there, what are they? We're going to break this down into three big categories, and let's start with maybe the most direct clues of all, the things people actually say. What should we be listening for?
The data makes this absolutely crystal clear. The single most common warning sign is also the most direct one. When someone talks about dying or says they want to kill themselves, that is not something to be ignored or brushed aside. It is a direct cry for help.
But it's not always going to be that blunt. The distress can come out in other ways, so listen for talk about hopelessness or feeling like there's just no point anymore. Pay attention if someone starts talking a lot about being a burden on others, or if they start saying these very final-sounding goodbyes and getting their affairs in order. These are all huge verbal flags.
All right, so that's words. But what about actions? Let's move to our second category, which is all about the changes in a person's behavior that you can actually see with your own eyes.
And two things really stand out in the data here. Almost half of individuals started to pull away from friends, family, things they used to love. That's social withdrawal. And almost the exact same numbers showed big changes in their character or their mood. And we're not just talking about a bad day. This is a real, noticeable shift in who they are.
So what does that change in character actually look like? Well, it can show up in a lot of ways. It could be sudden, reckless behavior, or maybe an increase in drinking or drug use. It could be giving away possessions that are really meaningful to them. It can even show up physically, like their sleep is all over the place, or you notice a real decline in how they take care of themselves.
Okay, we've covered what we might hear and what we might see. But what about the stuff going on inside? That's our third category, the emotional and psychological state. The things you have to kind of sense.
I want to just pause on this one phrase because it is so incredibly powerful. Perceived burdensomeness. This is that deep, painful, and frankly distorted belief that you are just a weight on the people you love and that their lives would genuinely be better if you weren't around. It's an absolutely critical emotional warning sign.
And this isn't just about sadness either. Look at this. While almost 30% of people had thoughts of death, other major signs were anxiety and agitation, that feeling of just being on edge all the time. Or, for someone who already has a mental health condition, you might see their symptoms get noticeably worse. It's a really complex emotional picture.
So now that we have this framework, verbal, behavioral, and emotional signs, let's use it to bust a couple more really dangerous myths that can stop us from helping.
Oh man, this is a huge one. So many of us are afraid to even bring up the topic because we're scared we'll somehow plant the idea in their head. But all the research, everything we know, says the exact opposite is true. Talking about it doesn't create the risk, it creates an opportunity. It opens the door for someone to finally share their pain and maybe, just maybe, find another way forward.
And here's another really important distinction. Yes, mental health conditions are a big risk factor, for sure, but suicidal behavior at its core is a sign of deep, profound unhappiness. And that kind of pain is something that anyone can experience, whether they have a diagnosis or not. This really widens the lens of who we need to be looking out for.
Okay, this brings us to what might be the single most important takeaway of all this. We've looked at all these individual signs, right? But the real key to recognizing what's happening isn't finding one sign by itself. It's all about seeing the pattern.
This is how you connect the dots. So let's say you hear someone say, "I'm such a burden." Okay, that's a verbal sign. Then you notice they've stopped answering texts and calls. That's a behavioral change. And when you do talk to them, you can just feel this deep hopelessness coming from them. That's an emotional shift. See, any one of those on its own is concerning, but a cluster of them across all three categories, that is a pattern that needs our attention, period.
And hey, this isn't just a theory. The research completely backs it up. Studies show that people in crisis are often showing 2 to 3 different types of these warning signs all at the same time. It's almost never just one thing. Seeing that combination is everything. The pattern is the signal.
And this all leads us to our final and maybe most hopeful idea. Once we see the pattern, what do? Well, understanding the mindset of someone in crisis, that's the key.
There's this myth that when someone is suicidal, they are 100% set on dying. But that's just not how it works. The reality is usually a state of profound ambivalence. It's like a war inside them, a part that wants the pain to end and a part that still wants to live. And that ambivalence, that's a window. That is an opening where our support, our connection, can actually tip the scale toward life.
So when you put it all together, we've learned there are signs that talking about it doesn't hurt and that there's often this window of ambivalence. It all points to one thing. Our actions really matter. Recognizing the unspoken and then having the courage to speak up, it can make all the difference. It just makes you wonder, what if simply asking the question, "Are you okay?" is the first step toward a completely different and more hopeful answer?